So welcome everyone to the launch of ZOM-FAM by Kama La Mackerel. Yay! We'll give collective cheers. My name is Anju Gogia. I'm the events coordinator for Another Story Bookshop, one of Toronto's oldest independent bookstores with a focus on equity, diversity, and social justice. I'd like to say a big thank you to Kate Pettigrew for providing live captioning for tonight's event. So participants can access captioning by clicking on the closed captioning icon on the bottom menu bar of their screen by the Q&A button. So I'll give you all a moment to do that if you'd like. And before we begin the event, I would like to offer our land acknowledgement. The sacred land on which we operate has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is a territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Two-Row Wampum says we are going to live on this land together and respect each other's sovereignty. The Dish with One Spoon is an agreement that recognizes that we live off the same resources. It is hard to eat a collective meal together off a dish with one spoon. Hence, protocols are put in place to ensure mutual respect and accountability to each other and to the land. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. Our intersecting communities are comprised of those native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as settlers who have come here by choice, force, or otherwise a result of colonialism and imperialism. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 Calls to Actions reaffirms that the treaties with Indigenous peoples must be lawfully honored. We are all treaty people and are responsible for honoring and upholding these agreements. We are grateful for the opportunity to work on this territory and to share space with all of you. So again, we're very thrilled to host the virtual launch for Kama La Mackerel's new book of poetry, ZOM-FAM. First of all, a big thank you, as I mentioned before, to the great folks at Metonymy Press, Ashley and Oliver, who helped put this event together. They are superstars in the world of publishing in our eyes and have published so many important books. We have copies of ZOM-FAM in stock at Another Story Bookshop. Our store is open for limited browsing for one more day. Tomorrow. Otherwise, we are doing outdoor curbside pickup 5 days a week. We do local delivery and we ship via Canada Post anywhere in Canada. I'd also urge you all to support the independent bookstores in your own communities. I'm not sure where you all live, but please support the indie bookshops. And if there's not one in your community, there'll be one close by that can ship it for cheaper than probably we can ship it if you live out west or out east. So please check it out. The books are easy to get. You can find them on our website at anotherstory.ca. That's ANOTHER story.ca, or again, at other fine indies. We're thrilled to have two guests joining us tonight, Kai Cheng Thom and Jess Sash. And before we get on with the event, I'm going to introduce everyone. So the star of the show, Kama La Mackerel is a Montreal-based Mauritian-Canadian multidisciplinary artist, educator, writer, community arts facilitator, and literary translator who works within and across performance, photography, installations, textiles, digital art, and literature. Kama's work is grounded in the exploration of justice, love, healing, decoloniality, hybridity, cosmopolitanism, and self and collective empowerment. Kama has exhibited and performed their work internationally, and their writing in English, French, and Creole has appeared in publications both online and in print. ZOM-FAM, their debut poetry collection, is published by Metonymy Press. Kai Cheng Thom is a writer, performer, somatics practitioner, lasagna lover, and wicked witch based in TK, Toronto. Kai Cheng is the author of several award-winning books, including I Hope We Choose Love, an essay collection on the topic of transformative justice, and the novel Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, A Dangerous Trans Girl's Confabulous Memoir, as well as the fantastic children's books From the Stars in the Sky to The Fish in the Sea. Presently living in Toronto, Jess Sash is an artist, writer, and performer whose work addresses the negotiations of bodies moving in public and private space and the work of their care. Their work and writing has appeared in Now Magazine, The Peak, CV2, the Canadian Journal of Poetry and Critical Writing, Mobilizing Metaphor, Art, Culture, and Disability Activism in Canada, and the 40th anniversary edition of Our Bodies, Ourselves. All right, please join me in welcoming Kama La Mackerel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for this lovely, warm introduction, Andrew. I actually also want to start by first of all talking about the territories where I am right now. I'm at present I'm in Dejage, which is known in the colonial context as Montreal, which is the place where I live and love, which is the traditional territories of the Ganyage Haga. And Montreal as well has been a meeting place for many indigenous peoples over generations and generations. And I think it's important to ground ourselves in the place where we are, in the history of where we are, and also to think about for those of us who are settlers, what are our responsibility to the lands, to the territories, but also to the traditional keepers of those territories. I want to say thank you to Metonymy Press, my wonderful editors at Metonymy Press, who really have been, have really had my back with this book, but also with launching this book in the middle of a pandemic and planning this book tour. I am super excited for tonight. Tonight is for me a vision. It's a manifestation of something that I've dreamt of for so long. I think from the very beginning, from the time 2020 started, and I knew that sometime in 2020 there would be a book that would come out. Like, I knew that there will be a Toronto book launch, that I wanted to be at Another Story bookshop, and that I wanted it to be with Jess and Kai Cheng, because Jess and Kai Cheng are two people who have accompanied me for my poetic journeys and all my journeys of the heart for many years. So even if we can't gather physically in a physical space together, I still see tonight as a wonderful manifestation, a wonderful femifestation of of this vision that we had put out into the world. So and thank you everybody for being here. So I will read a couple of excerpts from ZOM-FAM. Here it is, and then Jess and Kai Cheng will join me, and and we'll have a bit of a chat. So I'm going to read two pieces from the book today, and today is also Trans Day of Remembrance. So I will start by reading the opening piece, which is the invocation. I invoke, I invoke, I invoke, I invoke our mothers, our grandmothers, and our femme ancestries. I invoke the teachers, healers, mentors, caregivers, and warrior women of history. I invoke femmes of all genders, bloods, ages, lineages, generations of witchers and fighters who infuse the universe with love, rage, and magic. I invoke the dynasties of femmes who gouged the earth with their bare hands and planted roots from the seeds of their hunger. The bloodlines of women and femmes whose bodies are steep with the darkness of the Kala Pani, whose spirits are awash with the cleansing light of the full moon. I invoke my great grandmothers, whose unknowing bodies stormed on a ship from the continent to the island, hence tied, bodies battered, minds resilient. I invoke the deities who never made it to the shores, their copper flesh an offering to the creatures that live along the edge of the unknown, where ocean becomes sky and sky becomes ocean. I invoke the generations who suffered, who died, who lived, who fought, who resisted patriarchy and colonialism on sugarcane plantations. I honor my mother, Vimala Devi, nurse, caregiver, teacher, mentor, inspiration and embodiment of femme power. I honor her mother, Dana Pakion, whose fortitude knew no bounds, whose story remains untold, repressed, forgotten, chained to the silence of history. I honor Rita, whose womb carried ships of born and unborn children, brave mother who offered her milk and blood to quench the unconsolable longing of the aching land. I honor Katai, woman of rose water, saffron, betel leaves, and nuts, whose rugged feet walked earth, sand, basalt, and burning coal. I honor Kamala, whose ceremonial fingers enchant the dead and bring their spirits back to life. Uma, whose visions speak in femme tongues long forgotten. Lalita, whose sword flows like rivers longing for a sea to call home. Asha, whose ancestral lungs carry curses that quiver like crackles of burning sandalwood. And Devika, whose grief is cavernous like a sinuous passage in the night sky. And I invoke, I invoke strength and wisdom from Goddess Kalima, Redeemer of the universe, Goddess of time, change, and destruction, Goddess with charcoal eyes and a blood tongue, who cuts patriarchy and wears it as a garland around her neck. Goddess with matted hair and ivory fangs, who dismembers misogyny and wraps it as a skirt around her waist. That lineage, past, present, and future, the women and femmes who reshape the universe, I invoke and I honor. So this was the invocation, which is the opening piece in ZOM-FAM. And yeah, it felt very meaningful for me today to start with this, to honor the lineages of femmes, honor the lineages of trans femmes, the lineages of femme resistance in the multiple ways that allow us as femmes to still be alive now, and yeah, and I really wanted to bring that into each of our spaces tonight, wherever we might be, wherever we are. So ZOM-FAM is comprised of actually 8 poems because they are long form poems. They're not Twitter poems. They're not Insta poetry. So it's really long form poems, and there are 8 poems in the book that narrate the story of this gender creative child born in Mauritius, so on the plantation island in the 80s and the 90s, and the entire poetry is about the weaving and interweaving of languages and the multiple ways in which we try to break through and break across the colonial silences to find languages of love, to find ways of healing ourselves and loving ourselves, but also healing and loving across generations. And so one of the things about this book is that it was actually written initially as a manuscript for the stage before it was turned into a book. So the manuscript first existed for the stage, and the performance of ZOM-FAM, which was supposed to happen twice this year. It was supposed to premiere in April, but then of course the pandemic hit, the show got cancelled, and then it was supposed to happen again in October. And a week before the opening of the show, Montreal entered the red zone, which basically means we're on a semi-lockdown where all theaters got closed, amongst a few other things. That got shut down. So so the show was cancelled twice this year, but it's a solo performance, it's a 90-minute solo. And what I really was curious about, what I really wanted to explore in the performance, I wanted to see the poetry move through the body, move across space, move across the stage. Because I had done spoken word for many years, and I've done spoken word, and it was always just me at a mic. With a mic stand and with this manuscript, I really felt like the poetry wanted to move across space and through the body. And at the same time, so then later on, when I got to the process of turning the book into the manuscript into a book, one of the questions that I had for me, I really wanted to bring my performative practice into the work, into the body of the text. So the way I really thought about it was, for me, it was, what if the body of the text could perform on the page in the same way that the body of the performer performs on a stage? So everything in the book is laid out like very intentionally in as a way of bringing about like a performance of the text. So I do encourage you, if that's something you want to do, to get yourself a copy of the book, and to to also let yourself be carried away by the text as the text performs on the page. Because yeah, it is. I did write this as like an object that could be held, but also that I feel like can carry the reader in multiple ways. And the title, so the next piece I'm going to read is actually the title piece, ZOM-FAM, the piece called ZOM-FAM. And so just to give a little bit of context, it was very important. ZOM-FAM is a Creole term that means transgender, or man, woman, if you want. And it was very important for me that actually one of the things that I do with this book is actually a way I try to center through the poetry. It's a decentering of Western colonial gendered ways of being, to actually make space and celebrate like other pre-colonial and decolonial ways of being gendered beings, including being transgender. And it was very important for me that the title being Creole, that this takes, even if the book is written predominantly in English with bits of Creole and Hindi and Tamil and other ancestral languages, it was very important for me that that through this work there was a decentering of the dominant discourse around gender issues and trans issues, generally speaking. So that I'm going to read the piece ZOM-FAM for you. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She smiles with compassion. She speaks her golden heart, soft, warm, welcoming. Her eyes cast a resilient glow. She does not need to tell me. She does not need to tell me about our history, because our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But her body, her brown, exhausted body speaks of her childhood. I see in her old eyes the grimy streets of Portrush, grey, dusty, stifling under the burning sun. I see in the drooping ridges around her cheeks the cold embrace of banyan trees when the summer heat became too heavy to bear. I see in the shakiness of her eyelids melted tar gluing itself to her 8-year-old feet. In the streets of the capital, poverty was a sticky business. Particles of blackness stained the virtuous skin of childhood. I see in my mother's shiny forehead, in those beads of sweat that place themselves evenly on her skin, a child pushing a cart. Unde putu adu sonso. Unde putu adu sonso. Those sweets that her godmother made diligently with freshly crushed coconut and ground rice, and that she'd push in a cart every single day of her life, from Plaine Verte all the way to Cité Sainte-Croix. Unde putu adu sonso. Unde putu adu sonso. When I look deep into the battered trenches under my mother's eyes, I see copper coins shifting hands, churchgoers, beggars, children, sex workers, faithful and unfaithful, unwrapping round coconut ground rice sweets from the humidity of newspapers, dipped into hot black tea, an everyday ritual of my mother's childhood in Cité Sainte-Croix. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her withered hands shake like dried twigs forgotten by history, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She tells me, Patrakase-toi Kama, tu connais, Jimun Kumatwa tout le temps nasa. She tells me that we come from a history and a culture where men, women, and women, men have always existed. That people like me are present in our myths and our religions, and that for as long as she can remember, Vie Jimun, the elders, they spoke of the men, women, and the women, men. Her eyes mirror phantom images, lucent narratives line her haunted lips. She whispers into the soles of my feet that she vaguely remembers an old relative who lived close by when she was a child, who was of my kind. But she immediately closes her heart, fetters her lungs, stitches her throat with a filament of concealment. She threads the unspoken between our bodies because our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But every day since, I dream of my mother's childhood, and I dream of this old relative who was of my kind. Sometimes I call him Pajani. Sometimes I call him Devakumar. Sometimes I call her Badet. And sometimes I call her Nila. But most of the times I like to call her Kumkum. I dream of Kum with round shoulders, a blood-red bindi on her forehead, a glint of gold hanging over the edge of her pointed nose, raven curly hair, a tad too greasy but that still bounces up and down the nape of her neck as she walks in the morning sun. Kum wears plain cotton kurtas that she haggles in the markets of Plein Vert. And if she ever gets invited to a wedding, she adorns herself of her most prized garment, a brocaded red salwar kameez that wraps her rotund body like the heavy skin of syrupy lychee. Kum eats rice dal and pickles during the week, and on weekends she treats herself to some dried salted fish cooked with onions, fresh thyme, and tomatoes. And bon petit rougail poisson salé bien mauricien. And bon petit rougail poisson salé bien mauricien. Kum has a radio set, and she listens to the news and avis de décès every morning, and Hindi songs every evening. Kum rubs coconut oil in her thick black hair every Friday. Kum has a job. She works in the tobacco factory in the capital city with all the poor women whose husbands had died in obscure wars nobody on the island really knows about. They fought in a faraway British war and never came back. On her lunch break, Kum does not step out with the other women to roll tobacco in small newspaper pieces that burn their darkened lips. Instead, she stays at her workstation. She sits silently and she prays to Goddess Durgama. She prays for protection. She prays for a good life. She prays for forgiveness. She prays for love. When it gets hot in the capital city, Kum takes out a white embroidered handkerchief from her purse and wipes the purse of sweat on her forehead. Kum likes flower patterns. Kum loves embroidery. On Sundays, Kum polishes her floor et embroskoko. She brings out her mattress, leans it in the sun against the mango tree, and beats it with a stick. She winnows her rice and her lentils for the week. She makes fruit pickles that she dries on her roof, and at the end of the day, she massages her feet with a slick of warm coconut oil. Kum has a lover. But does Kum have a lover? I'm not sure yet whether Kum has a lover, but this is Kum. This is Kum, and I dream about her every day. She draws her life like a moving sculpture, a figure ever so ephemeral, becoming and unbecoming herself with every single one of my dreams. When I tell my mother that I am trans, she does not tell me about Perjani, Devakumar, Badit, or Neela. She does not even tell me about Kum. Instead, my mother tells me that she is an uneducated woman who feels much pride that I went to school, that I can read and write, that I speak English and I speak French. She tells me that because of her lack of education, she does not have the words for it, but she understands that people like me have always existed. She calls me ZOM-FAM, which in our local language means man, woman. I take pleasure in being ZOM-FAM. A man, woman, being neither ZOM nor FAM, yet being both ZOM and FAM.
navigating a middle passage between being and becoming, an interstice where migrant bodies like mine find their truth, an undefinable space that maps the cartography of my skin, a hyphen that holds and wraps my gendered experience. ZOM-FAM. 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 But my mother tells me that I shouldn't call myself ZOM-FAM, that she is an uneducated woman who does not know those things, but that she's happy, that I have an education, that I can call myself trans, that I have the words, the language to describe the mystification of my gender, the longing to tear off my skin, along with my skin, my birth certificate, my passport, the state-sanctioned papers that dictate my gender. But deep inside me, there is a voice that speaks in the uneducated tones of my mother. This voice embroiders itself from pore to pore onto the surface of my skin. There is a voice that does not have the words or the vocabulary, but reverberates goodness and music in my body, my heart beating the drums of my ancestors. There is a voice that did not go to school, does not speak English, does not speak French, yet echoes wisdom and truth in my bloodstream like the waves of the ocean that witness the loss of our languages. And that voice tells me that I do not need an imperial language to define myself, that I do not need to be trans in English or in French. Colonialism has already wrapped itself like a knot around our vocal cords, and even though our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies, this voice exists deep within, and it speaks like my mother, like my grandmother, like my great-grandmother, like the generations of women and femmes who fought to keep our language alive and pass it on from generation to generation. So mother, I will listen. I will listen to the voices of our ancestry, femme tongues that dictate that I speak out loud. And when I'm done tearing off my skin, along with my skin, my birth certificate, my passport, the state-sanctioned papers that dictate my gender, I will take every single piece of torn skin and paper. I will paint them in gold and put them back together with glistening stars as I so desire. I will build a femme armor, a fierce femme armor that I will celebrate, an unbreakable, unshakable object of love that I will hold together with respect and dignity. And I will call this armor ZOM-FAM. 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 When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She does not need to tell me. She does not need to tell me about our history, because our lineage is one of a secret language, a long lost secret language that we weave
in between our intimacies. ZOM-FAM. Thank you. So that was ZOM-FAM from the collection, ZOM-FAM, which I hope you will pick up, which I hope you will order from your local independent bookstore. I do agree with what Andrew said earlier in terms of like, I think it's so important at the moment to be supporting both our indie presses, generally speaking, not just at the moment, but I think in this particular moment, with the pandemic in particular and everything that's going on in the world, I think it's so important to hold on to our independent bookstores. And on this note, I will invite Kai Cheng and Jess to join me back for this part of the evening.
Kama, you're so amazing.
Thank you. And so are you.
No, but it's mostly you. So magical. Everyone is weeping behind their screen.
It's what is that Naira Wahid poem? These are not tears, this is the sea.
No.
Oh, so now I'm just crying more.
Why did you invite two Pisces to talk to you?
We're all Pisces, no? Everyone on this panel?
No, I'm an Aries, but my Venus is in Pisces, so there's a lot of water there.
We could just cry instead of talking. Just cry and cry. It can be like performance art. Everyone can just watch us cry and admire Kama's beautiful outfit.
You look so pretty.
Thank you.
You look really pretty too, Jess.
Thank you.
So, it's okay. We can just go on.
I think we're allowed to have a moment. Yes, and that's fine.
Why can't we be together in person?
I know.
I like the magic still flows through Zoom, but people deserve the chance to like bask in the glowing sun that is Kama La Mackerel, you know? Everybody in the audience, I want you to be basking right now.
I don't know if you caught the behind the scenes comment, but when you sent me your Zoom link, when it logged me in, it gave me your name as a screen name. And Kai Cheng was quick to defend that there is only one. It cannot be me.
We can't all be Kama. I mean, I guess we could. Hang on, let's see. There we go. No, it feels wrong. I can't do it. I have to change it. I feel like I'm burning, like I'm being punished.
I was like a dad, and I was like, how do you change it? I don't know how to change it.
Oh, we should say, okay, I'm going to ask you an intelligent question, Kama, because that is what I'm getting paid for. So, Kama La Mackerel, you know, you are a esteemed colleague to both Jess and I, but what the audience may not know is we have also both known you for, I mean, I've known you for like almost a decade, and Jess, I think you've known Kama for longer, right?
2007, is that accurate?
So that's 13 years.
Yeah.
And so we've seen your ascent, you know, into goddesshood, but we have also seen you post breakup. We know that you are obsessed with bacon.
I actually made a note about bacon while you were talking.
Yes. Curry goat, another weakness of yours. So I want to ask you a question about bridging the human and the divine, because I'm serious, you know, like the divine pours out of you. You've got art, you've got poetry, you have spirituality. And I was just noticing how, you know, your voice, like your literal, like the sound of your voice has become even more beautiful in the time since I last saw you perform. And I've been watching you perform these pieces since 2012. Like, and you know, everything about you has evolved and only grown more exquisite. So my question is, you know, like you're Kama La Mackerel, you know, multimedia artist, and I would also call you like a spiritual healer. I don't know if you take that on for yourself, but my spirit is healed when I'm near you. But there's also so much of the, you know, the human and the autobiographical that works its way into this body of work. And so I guess the question is really how much of ZOM-FAM is, you know, the very human you, like the you know, the flesh and blood you, and how much of it is like a narrative construction that you create to, you know, to heal and bring beauty into the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, according to my last calculations, 52.3% of it is. I'm not kidding.
Oh, girl. You know my weakness is math. Don't go throwing numbers in here.
But thank you. I have to say, just before I even answer this question, just like, yeah, how I feel so honored, and like my heart is just so full right now that I get to share this space with both of you. And yeah, and it's true, and it was important for me because I think you've witnessed me for like so many births and rebirths and grieving, and you know, like over the years, but also you've witnessed my birth as an artist. And I think with both of you over the years, we've really had like deep conversation around like what it means for us to be artists, what are the values within which we want to do it, like how to do it with integrity, you know, and then what does it mean for us to be public? And you know, like that was just like we've worked with those questions over the years. So and but also we've loved, and we've done conflict, and we've you know, like we've also have that very human connection, right? Like in terms of like, and for me, yeah, I feel like I've grown in my heart, I've grown in the human being I am, alongside the two of you. So I am very grateful for that. And I think that's a good segue in terms of the answer. Like I don't necessarily separate, you know, like increasingly looking back over this work now, and it's interesting now to also be at that point where I can like have distance to look back over something, but I realize increasingly just how much of this book, and as both of you know, before this was even a book, those were actually separate spoken word pieces, right? That like there was no, I didn't know this would come together into a manuscript for a show and then into a book, right? Those were just separate spoken word pieces. And I think through all of it, yeah, and I feel a lot of it was actually stories that I needed to write down in terms of finding a certain, you know, like, yeah, a sense of healing for myself, like a narrative that heals just for me, like, you know, for me, in that sense. But also as you know, when I look back now into the process of ZOM-FAM, and the show in particular did that for me, because the show is mounted, even if we're going to show it to present it to an audience. And by the time the show was fully mounted, and I was like, for me, I was like, I stopped talking about it as a performance. I like actually ZOM-FAM, it's a spiritual experience, really. And I feel it all went, for me, it all went alongside it, right? Like there was my personal journey in terms of, you know, like growing into myself, growing into my femininity as well, growing into my transness that was happening. And then alongside that, there was also, yeah, just like my spiritual practice started growing more and more as well. And there was a point of time where both of them came together. Like for me, they've merged, right? Like, because my femme identity is a spiritual practice now. I mean, it's also about like, you know, wearing the femme armor and looking great as I am right now, but it's fundamentally, yeah, like and all of my artistic practice now is really, so it is personal and biographical, and it was a healing journey to write it down. But I feel more than anything, it also did allow me, yeah, to tap into something that's bigger than I am, like bigger than we are, like to tap into a spiritual force that for me now at this point guides me as a femme, guides me as an artist, right? Like, and we've talked about this so many times over the years, right? Like, what is our job as artists? What is our role as artists? And for me, I really see, like this book is also a celebration of a decolonial way of being trans, right? Like, and for me, that trans femininity and that trans identity is a spiritual practice, right? Like more than like a state intervened medical, like, more than that understanding of transness. I think for me, where my work and my heart and my spirit are all going is 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 the answer, ascension to the femme divine. Really. At a bit of time, I actually thought, Kai Cheng, as you were like getting ready to ask me this question, I thought you would ask me, so how do you ascend to divinity?
That too. No, I'm taking copious notes. You heard it here for first, audience. Kama La Mackerel, how did you become a goddess? And how can we also?
Well, about 30 minutes to an hour of Vipassana every day.
No, but I love this because what I hear you saying is that, your art and also gender can be woven together. And that is also, woven with your spirituality. And this becomes the extension of yourself into the divine and also into community. So as you rise, we rise. And that's like, I think that, that is the most beautiful and succinct and like deeply like correct to me. It feels correct anyway, like summation of what it means to do art in like a community-based spiritual way. Anyway, I don't know. I'm just blown away by you all the time. Jess, cover for me while I cry some more.
Okay, I'll shield you. No, I really loved that you speaking specifically to that topic and that the last poem in ZOM-FAM. As somebody who likes to read books in reverse, I appreciated very much how you ended it, and I feel like I made a lot of notes, but I feel like I want to go there first. Speaking a lot, yeah. Given the way I appreciate, Kai Cheng, that you kind of opened up the space to frame just how much of relationship is involved with the two of us and Hara for context, because I find myself so drawn to this book in just its multi-modalities, like even just my curiosities to the conversations and the choices that went into the very texture and color-rich cover art, which I know you didn't do yourself directly, but it feels like a relationship or multiple relationships when I look at it. But what struck me about the last poem, and I want to ask you that, I suppose, feels connected to my curiosities about how it has been navigating an artistic practice of multi-modes, because I feel like there is kind of a colonial pressure to call yourself kind of what I feel is outdated words like multidisciplinary to somehow excuse what you were just speaking to, Kai Cheng, this kind of weaving through like fabric and textile into I really loved reading your words in text, but also I realized it was a little bit unfamiliar for me to do that beyond our love letter emails, because I'm so used to hearing your voice and your words and your spoken word. So I wrote down a note that was about the colonization of space and how that includes the space of the mind. And what's really struck me, and it's a piece I've heard live from you, but your chapter and your storytelling around the fixation your father had with the tiles. And I guess I was just wondering if you could perhaps, if you had any thoughts in the process, even within, especially the last 9 months of the pandemic, and what that must have felt like for you as an artist, a storyteller, a poet, a being, a community light, and what it's meant to kind of navigate. I guess even the pressures of how the pandemic has unfortunately put even more of a kind of pressure on business as usual, even though there's an opportunity to kind of really transparently examine how those things are kind of a fallacy. And thank you to Kay kind of for doing the live caption. I took a few screenshots because some of the, I don't know how you've been doing it, if it's like a copy and paste, but, and I don't know if you caught them, Kama, because you were reading, but some of the caption text was actually moving text much in the way you wrote it, and I haven't actually personally encountered that before, and it was just a beautiful textual layer that kind of deepens my questions for you, Kama, as an artist and a poet, and yeah, I will turn it over.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was
Thank
a lot.
Don't apologize for being too much. We've been working on this for years.
Okay.
No apologies for being too much. No, thank you for this. I think as you also have an interdisciplinary practice, it's increasingly for me also, like, I think that ties to what I was saying earlier, because I do see the interdisciplinary practice for me as a decolonial practice, right? Because I am actually pushing against colonial disciplines, right? Like in that sense, and for me it's important because I do think that it's in those interspaces that new vocabularies can actually emerge, and in this case, if I'm trying to articulate a decolonial aesthetics or poetics, right, like, and I think it happens in the interspaces, right, like, which is in that hybrid space, but also for me, I'm starting to see it as well, as in terms of the interspace, the interstice is like so present in who I am, right? Like in terms of being mixed race, interethnic, growing up in an interreligious family, being Mauritian on my way to becoming Canadian, right? Like via India somehow, and all, and then traveling across genders, right? Like, and then I also and then there's the gender traveling, and I think it feels right, like in my intuition, like in it feels right in my spirit, that the work then, like whatever is it that I'm trying to enunciate, that the decolonial aesthetics emerges from interspaces, because part of it is, and so much of my work is concerned with ancestry and haunting and the past and that connection between past, present, and future, that and there's also that part of like traveling between the world of the dead and the world of the living, right? Like the worlds of the spirit and the living flesh and blood world that we exist in, and for me then, like, the interspaces have become increasingly rich and in terms of course disrupting a colonial, like the singularity of a colonial narrative, absolutely, but also like offering those multiple points of access, right? Like I like that kind of like those multiple weavings in that sense. And I do want to give like the story behind the book cover as well. Only and Kai Cheng, who are two of my femme besties, actually worked on this cover, and it's and I love how everything is threaded in it, right? Like, it's so much of the imagery of the poetry is about textures and like and threading and weaving, and then this piece is actually it's inspired from a photograph that from a project of mine that I worked on, which one of my oldest friends, my sister Nadine, photographed, right? Like, and then this piece is inspired from that, and then Only and Kai Cheng worked on it for two of my besties here, and they created the textile piece, because I wanted something that, they created a textile piece, and they painted of it, and they stitched over it and stuff like that, and that became the cover. So I also love when, like, in terms of that interweaving, I also love how like all my femme intimacies are also wrapped up in the work, like, and it feels like a weaving. It's a weaving of words, of vocabulary, of poetry. It's a weaving of like theory or politics, if you want, in terms of articulating a, like a decolonial language, but also it's a weaving of relationships, right? Which are the relationships with my family and with home and with the ancestors, but also the community relationships, and all of that is weaved into the work.
Yeah, it's palpable both within and on outside of the book itself, and the ways in which you're using art to articulate in that way, art being poetry or any kind of form, to remind that there's always that art is the opportunity to be in relationship, and the ways in which that's ongoing, including even that, like, the beautiful story of how, like, you can feel that this is textile art, but you know that it's like a printed cover, and so how even that was like many tethers of the making, and then the turning it from one form to another. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm noticing that we have been reminded gently that we are coming close to the hour mark, and we might want to open
Really?
up to, yeah, it's 7:59. We might want to open up to audience questions. And we have been given the go-ahead to extend. Kama, do you want to open up to audience questions, or do you want to receive more questions from us? You're beautiful.
I did have one more, but I don't know how big the answer will be, so I can also shelve it.
Go for it.
Okay. I really want to know. I was pretty spellbound. I don't know where you guys by pages 90 and 91. And it super called to mind of two other poets that I deeply respect. It called to mind Joshua Whitehead, and it called to mind the prologue of Toni Morrison's From the Bluest Eye, and just how magnificently choreographic and sculptor like those horses were, with those kind of. Anyway, I don't need to say anymore. I have my own thoughts and my own visceral feelings that I felt when I got to those pages, but and I don't know if it would help to tell the audience about those pages, but it's spectacular what you did with that two-page spread.
Show us.
Oh, sure. Sure. Sorry, I tend not to show it because I'm like, okay, I'll just show it.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Queen.
Yeah, so it's ZOM-FAM. Yeah, I tend not to show it because I'm like, I just want to let the readers discover by themselves, by surprise, sort of. Because it is. I mean,
I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. It's
We just ruined it, Jess.
No. No, I mean, no, it's totally fine. Because, when Hazel Jane Plant read it, she sent me an email and she said that, where she was like, and then I turned on this page, and that's what the surprise, right? Which was like, oh my God, it was just this immense joy sort of a thing. And sorry for the 14 people who might be attending this right now, who maybe haven't seen it yet. But I mean, hopefully the story will still bring you to that point of joy. But but to answer the question, it's interesting because I'm going to go back to the Bluest Eye, because I don't necessarily get the reference here, and I'm like, I should go back to it.
Would you like? I can describe it. It's I guess it's more of a personal response. When I first read that prologue, I was like 16 at the time. But Toni Morrison, without kind of any explanation before getting into the story of that novel, she types out one of the Dick and Jane stories, and then she types it out again and removes all punctuation, and then she types it out again and removes all spaces between the characters. And it's a very visceral feeling,
right.
in the sense of like what she's doing with space and what she's doing about talking about I think colonization of space being not just physical, but the page, the mind, the body. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I love this. Thank you. The major influence, which is also a major influence in my writing and my poetry, generally speaking, is Norba Philip. And, both her work, She Tries Her Tongue, and also Zong, And Zong, specifically for those who don't know, Zong was actually a slave ship, that had left the African coast to come to the Americas, and then along the way, the ship, the captain didn't know where he was going. They got lost, so they decided to throw 150 slaves overboard, so they could claim the slaves as insurance money, because the slaves were considered as goods, not as people, once they reach the Americas. And so the Zong case, all that's left of the Zong case is this one legal document. And what Norbese Philip does with it is she actually uses that one legal document, and then she writes this book, Zong, and she tries to explode it, right? Because she's really delving into that notion of ancestry. And for me, that's something that's very tied to me, in particular when it comes to the ocean, right? Like when it comes to the act of drowning, right? Because when you're drowning, you can't even scream. It's not like you're falling off a cliff or something. You are drowning, we can't even hear your voice. So how do you give voice then to the dead in that sense? And what she does with it is like, she uses the same text from the legal document and she spreads it over the page, and she totally undoes it and does that play between like space and then the traces and the haunting happens through it. And her work, Zong, but also she tries her tongue, both her work is very, very influential. It's probably one of the poets for sure that has influenced me the most. And I think with the part of like that celebratory part of like ZOM-FAM that takes space, like takes 2 whole pages. I think there was very much of that influence here. And I have to say, I'm going to give a shout out to Amber Dawn, because Amber Dawn edited me and edited this book. And when she read the first draft, she was the one who was like, why does the ZOM-FAM take such little space? She was like, why don't you just take 2 pages? Like, she was like, spread it out, take space.
Yeah, it looks like, as a fellow dancer, I don't know how many people know you dance, but it looks like butts across the page, like even just how you decided to place the words and how it's just the same, even the punctuation of the exclamation mark, which you can take to mean joy, you can take to mean anger, but you definitely can't refute that it's noise, it's loud, it's sound,
Yeah. I'm going to look into the Q&A box and just see if there are any questions. Okay, there's one question that says, if there's anybody else who want to type in a question right now, it's the moment. There's somebody who's asking, how long have you been writing for? Oh, good question. For a long time, for a very, very long time. I still have teenage poetry, like really pathetic, like full of pathos teenage poetry that I wrote, and apparently they're still in notebooks somewhere, but somehow I have carried across oceans and across continents. No, but I started writing as a teenager mostly, and then I think, and I wrote in different ways. Like I did like more. When Jess was the editor of a newspaper, I was writing for a newspaper, working as a journalist, sort of a thing. I had a blog when blogging was a thing, when Blogspot was a thing, which the 2 of you might know for many, many years. And I think that's it. Like, I think for me, the way I see it was that, the past 15 years of writing was just a refining of my craft, right? Like a refining of my craft, of finding my voice, of finding what resonates true to me, that feels, connected and right in my intuition. So yeah, it really feels like the past 15 years. I've been writing for the past 15 years and just exploring and refining my voice until I was like, I found the thing where I'm like, I think this is me.
I see another question for you, Kama, which is from Jonathan. If you weren't writing poetry, what would you do?
What do you mean in my life? Because I'm not always writing poetry. I'm like, that's the thing. I have a performance practice. I have a translation practice. I'm translating a novel right now. I'm translating Pismens and Notorious Liars right now.
I hear that's a terrible novel.
Yeah, right. We were just part of like the Oprah list that came out yesterday, right? Like I was like, Oprah has such bad taste in book. But no, I mean, mean, like, I do have a multidisciplinary practice, but I think if the question, if I wasn't be writing poetry, because I'm not sure if I wasn't writing poetry, what would I be writing? I mean, I am very interested in exploring fiction and short stories. That's kind of where that's going to be a bit of my winter have fun. So let's see how that goes. But I'm going to explore fiction for the very first time. But I've done the nonfiction, the more journalistic style, like that kind of things, academic papers too. I had to do this when I was in university. That I've done.
I have a question to another question. I always have questions
Yes.
for you.
I love that you almost just said follow up like a journalist. I have a follow-up.
I'm coming back to like what you were talking about spirit and how, for, in the book and also in your performance piece and in your life, gender is a spiritual practice, or the femme identity is part of spiritual practice. And I'm just thinking about, that's really landing with me, and I'm going to think about it for a while, because I think that's how a lot of trans and gender diverse people of color experience it. There's something spiritual, also white trans folks often too, but that goes so strongly against either the trans medicalist view, which is that being trans is a medical condition, or even the kind of like, I guess I would call it like the mainstream liberal leftist view on being trans, which is like it's a part of your identity, and like it's sort of like scientific somehow, maybe like socially constructed, and that's just who you are. And there's so much fear around, in both the left and in the right, around acknowledging that gender is spiritual. Because if it was, that would mean we would have to acknowledge the mystical, which if we did, then we would have to sort of acknowledge that the underpinnings of the medical industrial complex and Western colonization are not correct. And so I wonder, and you don't have to answer this obviously because it's kind of personal, but like how did you come into this understanding of gender as spiritual? Was it always there? And how do you hold that up against the, the sort of the pressure to have gender and also like transsexuality or being transgender as like the dominant scientific ways of having a gender diverse identity?
Thank you. I very much love this question. Because those are things that I think about a lot, actually. And because I do think, actually, yesterday I was, for Trans Awareness Week, I was giving a keynote at the University of Michigan and mostly talking to like trans youth. And that's what was one of the things that I was reminding them of, where I was like, remember, we travel across genders. There's nothing more magical than this. Like, there's nothing more magical than traveling across genders. And of course, it freaks everybody out. Of course, people are scared of us. Of course, they've been trying to get rid of us for generations and generations, right? Because it's important to remember that the origin of colonial history, right, like including here on Turtle Islands, when colonizers reached the coast and they saw gender non-conforming people in all sorts of pre-colonial societies across the world, whether it's in Southeast Asia, right, like, or here on Turtle Island, the first people who were murdered were the gender non-conforming people, because they were the spiritual leaders, right? Like, they were the people who knew the medicine, who had the knowledge, who had the wisdom, who had the art, right? And they were the first people. And we tend to forget that part of colonial history, that actually that first enactment of colonial violence was actually against trans people, what now we call trans people, right? Like, because I think there's something about that magic, there's something about the power, the spiritual power, that scares, that terrifies basically a lot of the world, which is why there's so much violence against trans people. But also I think our sheer existence, particularly as trans people of color, our sheer existence disrupts the very notion of colonialism, right? Like, it breaks apart the gender binary, which was also a colonial tool, right? Like, which was very much a colonial tool, and it just explodes that entire category. And I think that's why we're so feared in many ways. And I think that's why there's so much of a backlash against our existence. And for me, I have been increasingly pushing back. Like, I don't know, like, there's a part of me that feels like, to answer the more personal part of it, like, because I feel it really feels like a core, like, I felt like there's nothing else I would have been able to do.
Like, you know, like I felt like the universe would have pulled me. That's how it feels in my life. Because basically the thing about it is like in the beginning, I adopted a very Western trans medicalist approach to transition. And then something else happened, which was like more in my personal life that like set me spiraling into this dark road for like months. And it was that process of like grieving for all those months where like gender was not even a question, because just like existence was just like so complex at the time and close to impossible. And then doing that work of grief, and now it feels like, oh, that work of grief would have happened anyway, because it really feels like, oh, there are greater forces who were like, this is where you need to be. And in terms of now, I do I mean, I make no excuses. I have no apology. Like, I really push back. I say my trans identity is a decolonial way of being in the world. Like I stated clearly as this. I'm like, of course, people experience gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is real, but I don't think that the you know, I mean, the medical institution is a colonial institution, right? Like, and for me, yeah, I just frame it in unapologetic ways as a spiritual practice. Yeah.
Love it.
Big question.
Everybody needed to hear that. Oh my goodness. There is another question, I think. From the audience. Are you going to give out writing programs for other writers who might be struggling with their writing process?
Let's see. I mean, in the sense of like, I've been doing this for years already, is what I mean. I mean,
Kama is a great teacher.
I've been running creative writing programs, performance program, different sorts of creative program, mostly with queer and trans youth of color. I've worked a lot with trans women and femmes, and things are a bit disrupted because of COVID right now. We'll see as we get into the new year. But yeah, this is something I actively do. Yeah. On this note, friends, it's 8:15 and we went a bit over time. I do want to take a moment. So Andrew's going to hop back on for the concluding comments. But before we do this, I again want to thank everybody who logged in, everybody who's watching from wherever you're watching tonight. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Kai Cheng and Jess, for being part of this conversation. Like, you don't know how much joy this brings to my heart. Like, really, I'm just so overjoyed. And yeah, and ZOM-FAM is out. Please order it. Please ask your bookstores to stock it. Please ask your libraries to order it. Those are just very concrete ways of supporting artists at the moment. And if you're on Goodreads, on Twitter, or whatever, like, give it a rating, give it a short review, because those are just things that are helpful within those COVID times where we can't go on tour to just promote the book. And yeah, and thank you everyone. And I'm gonna pass it on back to Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kama. Thank you to Kai Cheng. Thank you to Jess. Big thank you to Kay Pettigrew for live captioning. And of course, big thank you to Ashley and Oliver at Metonymy Press for bringing out this most beautiful, beautiful collection. We're so honored to have been part of this launch. Thank you for bringing your gorgeous words out there in the world. Again, we are selling it at anotherstory.ca. So pick up your copy of ZOM-FAM at anotherstory.ca virtually. We can deliver it to you, mail it to you. You can pick it up outside your doors. And again, support indie bookstores across Canada. Order the book from your indie bookstores. And again, get it into your library, into your schools, into your homes. So thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful night. Bye-bye from Toronto.